Hello and welcome back to Laughing Through the Pain, Navigating Wellness with me, Richard L. Blake, my co-host, Andy Esam, and today we have Stephanie Bruce. So Stephanie is the CEO and co-founder of Moonbird, a health tech startup active in the well-being space. Moonbird is the world's first handheld breath pacer and is all about making breathwork accessible to let people live healthier and happier lives. The product is used to decrease stress, manage anxiety, and combat insomnia. Stephanie has a medical background, a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, and a master's in IP and data protection law. Before starting Moonbird, she worked in two other startup companies, Ectosense medical devices and Cowboy consumer e-bikes, when she discovered the effectiveness of breathing exercises to tackle her own insomnia. She submerged herself in the matter. Before starting Moonbird, there was no company translating scientific insights into attractive end products for consumers. This is why Moonbird exists, to make breathwork accessible, cool, and convenient. And that's also why I exist, to try and make breathwork cool and convenient. That's why I wear these blue light hipster glasses, to try and make breathwork cool. But no, thank you, Stephanie. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for that nice introduction. How about
Yeah,
yourself? How are you doing?
I'm all right. Yeah. Andy, how about you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. Yeah, and Stephanie, it's really nice to meet you because I must admit I've never got the hang of doing breath work without Richard L. Blake. So I'm
You
very
need a
excited to hear
Richard or a
how to
Moonbird.
do that.
Hmm,
I think
indeed.
a moonbird would be cheaper.
I'll give you a discount. How low can we go? Sell myself out. No, Moonbird would definitely be, probably a better option for you. Listener, we are using a new recording studio today. We're using Squadcast. We're breaking the fourth wall here, letting you backstage. This is the second time we've used Squadcast. We used to use Riverside. The first time, that was, we mentioned this previously, where we recorded, I think, what was probably generally would have been regarded the greatest podcast episode ever, but then we didn't actually record it. So yeah, it's lost to the annals of time. So if we have any technical issues today, apologies, but we're not going to, because we'll edit those out anyway. But just to let you in, just because that's what this podcast is about. It's like hanging out with mates, isn't it? Right. Right? No, not for
Yeah, I
you.
feel like Stephanie. That's not to make you sound like a guinea pig here. We're very confident this will work. Okay,
No,
I'm
I
feeling
love
good
that.
about it.
It sounds like we're friends already and we don't even know each other that well.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
You were doing a good job
Well,
there.
on that, I just wanted to dive into your story a little bit further. It sounds really interesting. But yeah, you mentioned insomnia there. But how did you get from insomnia to creating like the Moonbird device?
Yeah, so I have a medical background, as Richard said. So I've always been interested in what keeps us healthy and what made us sick. And in my education, I just found it super interesting that I learned about all these pharmacological solutions to deal with that, but not so much about the natural things to deal with these problems that we all face. And so I started really going to explore yoga and then on to meditation. And then finally, I discovered how our own breathing can be super impactful to calm our nervous system down. And while I was doing my PhD, I dealt with a lot of stress and I developed sleeping problems, which then turned into insomnia. And so at that point in time, I tried to marry like my personal interest in breath work and meditation to tackle my own problems with falling asleep. And I went to the science and I read so much about how beneficial breath work and how impactful it can be. And so I was super convinced of these techniques to deal with my own insomnia at that point in time, but also for other problems like anxiety and stress in general. And although that I read all the books, I read the science, I took courses, I learned so much about these techniques. When I was super anxious and super stressed, I still struggled with implementing these techniques. And I felt it is just really hard to keep your focus even though that you're a well-trained meditator. When you're having a panic attack, it's very difficult to keep your focus on these exercises. And that's the problem that I wanted to solve. Like, how can I guide myself to keep my focus on these exercises at moments when I need it the most? And then basically the idea came like, why don't we develop a physical tool that makes it super intuitive for you to stay focused, to keep your focus on these exercises, where you literally feel how you need to breathe and you don't have to count or look at a screen or an app to keep your focus anymore. And so that was the genesis of a physical breathing coach.
Awesome. Yeah, that is definitely feedback I've had, is like some people really like that counting, like they really want to be counting, in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, and Moonbird. Tell us more about how Moonbird does that and the different types of breath work available.
So the device is a tool that you hold in your hand, and it has these, for the people that are looking, it has these like wings on the sides of the device. It has a form of an avocado. And when you give it a little shake, these wings will start to expand and contract. And so the avocado swells and shrinks or expands and contracts in the palm of your hand. And you literally mimic this movement with your breath. So when the avocado or the Moonbird device expands, you breathe in, you expand. And when it contracts, you breathe out, you contract. And this makes it super intuitive for you to do these exercises.
Awesome. And what kind of breath work is it doing? Is it like a stimulating breath work? Is it a relaxing breath work? What kind of techniques are on there?
We are initially focused on down-regulating the nervous system because that's really the point of view where I started from. And the device lends itself also better to do that because it's quite slow, like it moves on a subtle pace. And yeah, it allows you to breathe with it very easily. But you can, with the app, change the exercises on the device. So we typically do a 5 in, 5 out, very balanced breathing exercise, but you can change the settings. We've got some preset exercises in the app as well, an exercise for sleep where we prolong the exhalation even more, exercise for anxiety, the box breathing, and so on. But you can completely customize it with whatever you like. I have used it myself as well for upregulated breathing exercises. So I've done like an online coaching session and I use it and I set it at 1 second in, 2 seconds out. That works really well as well. But it's something that we still need to venture in from the marketing side, and it's just a different ball game. And personally, I love breathwork in all its facets, but I also think that if you're doing upregulated breathwork, it's better to do it with a coach, being it online or in face-to-face setting. But you just want that there is somebody there that if some emotions are released or whatever, that you can talk about it to someone. So I'm just like still trying to find out, do we want to develop Moonbird and have it and integrate it in the upregulated breathwork space or not? Like, I'm not sure if we should do that.
I think that's
so
a
at the
very
moment, I was just going to say, so it's a calming mechanism, just for
Yes.
putting it simply.
Yeah, exactly. You could say it's a stress relief device. It's a relaxation tool, and you can use that obviously for whatever your stress relief you need, if being it for sleep or anxiety or whatever. But yes, a stress relief device.
No, just going back to your previous answer, I think that sounds very responsible, Stephanie. So a lot of our podcast is about calling out the bad stuff in the wellness industry. And I kind of volunteer for the Global Breathwork Practitioners Alliance. And I think a lot of people in your position who had quite a big company, they would just be like, it doesn't matter about safety. We're just going to, whatever's going to make most money, whatever's going to sell most devices. So I'm very reassured by the fact that you're questioning this. But maybe there is a way to use Moonbird with a coach, maybe coaches who are trained in holding space for people and working with people as counselors, psychotherapists. They can use the Moonbird in conjunction with a live session.
Yeah, absolutely. So we published a paper today on how Moonbird can be used in a psychology practice. There is a big practice in Belgium where they use the Moonbird as an adjuvant to cognitive behavioral therapy. And they use it like they do talking therapy, and then they give the Moonbird as well to the people so that they have something physical to support their therapy. And it really helps the people to work on their mind body connections and to stay focused on these breathing exercises, and it complements their therapy. So it is actually being used in the therapeutic setting as well, but that's more, it's in that calming sense. It's really to down-regulate the nervous system and to make sure that you can connect your mind and your body, and not so much on the intense breathwork side of things. So yes, we do already work with coaches and psychologists and physiotherapists, but it's a bit of a different setting than the typical breathwork class you would attend.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Where was that paper published?
I have to look up the name of the journal. It's not a super famous journal, so I
Okay,
have to
but
look
it's a
up the name.
journal nonetheless. Congrats.
It's
I'll
yes,
probably
it's
do
a
an
scientific journal.
Instagram post about that. Whenever there's a new breathwork study, I've taken to doing carrots.
That
So
would be lovely.
if you wouldn't
Yeah,
mind
I'll do
sending it
this.
to me.
Absolutely. No, I'll do the same from my end. And yeah, no, it just came in like a couple hours ago. So
Wow.
new
Congrats.
stuff.
I
Yeah.
mean, scientifically validated. That's a big claim you can put on your device or on your website. Hey, listener, if you're enjoying the insights and stories we share on our pod, then don't miss out on any of our episodes. Hit the subscribe button to download and listen to our conversations at your convenience.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question about feedback from customers. What are you finding are the most common uses for it, and who's using the Moonbird most commonly?
So we do a lot of customer research to answer exactly that question. And we see that around 40% of our users use it for stress, so quite generic. And then there's the second and third biggest user groups are anxiety and sleeping problems. But I'd say that stress also impacts sleeping problems and so on. So it's often linked to each other. And then we also have people dealing with, for instance, autism and ADHD, all these use cases where stress aggravates the symptoms or the disorders are use cases where Moonbird can be beneficial.
So you mentioned people with autism and ADHD. Is it something special about the actual device, the avocado shape, or the tactile thing that makes it particularly useful for those kind of people?
That's a very good question. And that's what I've heard, at least from those people, saying that the tactical aspect of the device makes it very concrete and very easy for them to keep their focus. It's not something that I got from research or that we have validated or looked into more, but that's at least the feedback that we got, yes. And I can imagine that as well, that if it's very difficult to keep your focus, this is something that makes it very concrete. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you use a few sort of biofeedback measures as well. Can you say a little bit more about how you use biofeedback?
Yes. So when we started the company, we had the idea of just creating the avocado shaped device. But my brother, who's my co founder, by the way, he is very into data and he is more of I wouldn't say that he doesn't believe in these kind of things, but he needs to be convinced. He's a bit more skeptical. And so he loves to see the data and how these things impact his body as well. And when I dove into the science behind Moonbird, I saw there is a lot of data on HR and HRVs, or heart rhythm and heart rhythm variability, that actually can show you the impact of these exercises in real time. So that's when we developed the device. We married these two things, like the idea of building the avocado shape that gives you the feedback, and then as well put in a sensor to measure the real-time impact of the exercise on your body, and we can show that it works. And so the whole idea is, so that's why there's a sensor incorporated in the device as well. So you put your thumb on the sensor while you're doing an exercise, and you can combine it with an app. And then when you do the exercises, you really see that when you breathe in, your heart rate goes up, and when you breathe out, your heart rate goes down. And this is a normal variations that you see in your heart rate, which is heart rate variability. But when you do slow paced breathing exercises, this effect becomes more pronounced, and you'll see like bigger wave pattern appearing in your heart rhythm curve. And so your heart rate variability is higher. And this is generally accepted as a metric for good health, being, resilience, and so on. And so breathing exercises are one of the easiest and most, I wouldn't say most effective, but one of the easiest ways to train your heart rate variability and to make sure that your HRV goes up over time. And so that's really what we wanted to call guidance, but then also the biofeedback component. And then there's the app with the exercises and so on. So it's really a complete coach, but it's optional as well. If you don't like to use the biofeedback or the app, you're not obliged to do that. For instance, for my sleeping problems, I use my Moonbird every night, and I didn't want to use the app or connect it to the app in order to do that. And so it's not obliged to do that. You can use the Moonbird standalone as well.
That's awesome.
What are the measurables on the app? And I suppose, you mentioned a short-term impact on, say, HRV, but is it possible to track improvement of those metrics over time as you use the Moonbird more regularly?
Yes, so that is indeed the idea. So HRV is a very complicated metric. I'm not sure how familiar you are, but it's a very complicated metric. And essentially what we would like to see in the data is that you'll use a device for a period in time. So you'll get to know yourself and you'll find your baseline HRV. And then, for instance, let's say you're going through a very stressed period in your life and you can see that your HRV is a bit lower. And then while using the Moonbird more regularly, over time, you'll see that your HRV improves during the exercises, but also more continuously. The cool thing there is that, so we are a solution, right? People use Moonbird when they want to feel more calm or when they have sleeping problems, but it's only during a couple of minutes or like 10 minutes or whatever, like a couple times a day. We're not a wearable and people don't use the device all the time. But we have gotten a lot of feedback from people who have a Whoop or an Aura Ring that are continuously tracking their data, that when they use their Moonbird regularly, they also see that during the other moments of the day, their HRV is better and they're improving, they're more resilient, and their recovery is much better after sports performances and so on. So I actually would love to do a lot more research on that to make sure that we can prove that as well. But that is very cool to see. That's very promising.
Yeah, absolutely. HRV is such an interesting metric. So, for listeners who don't know, HRV, heart rate variability, is the gaps between your heartbeat. So, most people know that their heart rate is about 40 beats per minute, but each beat has a different rhythm. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower, and the more variability that you have between your heartbeats, the more resilient you are, supposedly, the more stress physiologically and probably emotionally as well you're able to take on. So that's one of the main things that things like, yeah, Stephanie mentioned, the Oura Ring and the Whoop measure. And you want to be seeing your HRV at a generally high level. So if the Moonbird really can help you raise your HRV, that means you're raising or increasing your tolerance to stress, boosting your resilience, and just making life a little bit more manageable. So yeah, I would love to see that research as well, Stephanie. So where does the name Moonbird come from?
Yeah, Moonbird is actually a real bird that existed. It's red knot or the red knot species. It's a very small bird that scientists used to put a small ring around his paw and they used to follow him. The time that they tracked him, he flew more than the distance from the moon. So each year he flew from the Terra del Fuego in Argentina to Canada, to the Arctic in Canada. And they did that for more than 17 years. And in the total, his lifespan, he flew more from the distance to the Earth and the moon and back. And that's why they baptized him the Moonbird. And he was a signal of good health and longevity and being. And he has a Wikipedia page. He even has videos on YouTube. We loved that name and that it was still available in what we were doing. So we trademarked the name and yeah, it worked out. And then the product, when we invented it, it's weird to say, but it looked like a Moonbird, even though that doesn't really exist. It has these wings that expand. And so an eye that resembles some sort of, I don't know, futuristic thing. And yeah, it just worked really well.
Awesome. So what kind of bird was it? That it was called the Moonbird, or was this just one bird that was particularly good at flying?
Yes, so it's one particular bird, and also has a more scientific name, which is B95. But the scientists then baptized him as the Moonbird, which is
Oh,
much
I
more
think
cute.
Moonbird's
Yeah.
a better name. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
I'm curious as to if you didn't have stress or anxiety or not, or you certainly weren't aware of it. But it's something like breath work to calm the nervous system is obviously a great thing to build into your routine, even if you don't have anything going on. So could you give us a bit more about how to build it into your routine, where and when to use it? Because I'm guessing, for example, on the underground wouldn't be a particularly great place. So yeah, how do most people use it?
Yeah, it depends a lot on what you'd be using it for. We have people that just proactively want to manage their health and work on their well being, using it a couple times a day. And those are the people that there was one on Instagram today. So I woke up and one of the first things that I do is I check the Instagram page of Moonbird if there are any messages coming in or people like tagging us, which I always love. And this morning there was a guy that tagged us saying, I always have such good recovery results with my Whoop or Aura when I use my Moonbird, and he uses it. I sent him a message. I said, thank you so much for sharing that. And he says, it's phenomenal. Every time when I use it 3 times a day, I just see that all my resilience and stress metrics with my wearables are so much better. So these are the people that use it throughout the day on a consistent basis, just because they're the health enthusiasts and fanatics. But then there are also the people who have issues and they use it more. I think it's advised to use it when you feel that you have the issue, whether it being anxiety or sleeping problems, but also throughout the day, because that's actually what you need to do. You do not need to manage that problem when you have the problem. It's often like a sign of underlying stress, and you need to manage that throughout the day as well. People, for instance, who wake up during the night, it's because the cortisol that they build up as a consequence of stress during the day wakes them up when they leave their deep sleep during the night, right? So you don't tackle that by doing a breathing exercise at night. You tackle that also by doing breathing exercises during the day, because you need to decrease those general stress levels. Anyway, long answer to say, best way to do it is on a consistent basis, a couple times a day. But I guess that's the same with jogging and eating well and stuff like that.
For sure, yeah. And then most of the exercises on the app say the beginner's exercise. What period of time are we talking about here?
2 to 3 minutes, and every minute longer is better. So it starts short, and it starts with whatever works for you. 1 minute is better than no minute, I'd say.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Andy, I just want to go back to your point or question about people who don't know they have anxiety or don't have anxiety. There was a really good episode of Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom that came out last week with Abigail Shrier, who I mentioned. She was on Joe Rogan. She's this psychotherapist who's quite like anti-psychotherapy. She's not anti-psychotherapy, but she's very much like, we shouldn't just be forcing everyone into psychotherapy, especially not children. And I think there's going to be a bit of a backlash coming forward in that we at the moment, we're teaching children like mental health, and there was that famous study, or not famous, but we mentioned it before, of the 6-week program they did for children in Australia on their mental health, and their mental health was worse after the 6-week program, because a lot of these children, they didn't have mental health issues, but then they gave them mental health issues by thinking, oh, I need to be self-regulating all the time, I need my emotions validated all the time. And yeah, I think we've got a little bit of a problem in that, like, people like Gabor Mate are trying to sell their books and their talks, trying to convince everyone they have trauma when they don't have trauma. And I think similarly, a lot of people who have anxiety think everyone must be like, I have anxiety, so everyone must have anxiety. So everyone should be doing breath work. Everyone needs to be doing ayahuasca or whatever. And it's not the case. I think only 40% of people have anxiety. That's not the majority. So Moonbird is going to be great for those 40% of people who are struggling with anxiety. But by forcing Moonbird or my breath work or psychotherapy onto people who don't have problems, you're going to make them think they have problems. It's going to be like a hypochondria. So yeah, I'm going to be pushing back against anyone who tries to say, oh, everyone should be doing this thing. I do this thing, so everyone should be doing it. And I know, Andy, you're not, trying to say that. It may have just been a sort of a question.
It was more a question of, so for example, me, I like doing breath work. I don't really know particularly why I do it, but it feels very nice after I've done it. So it was more thinking, how do you build it into routine, and what are the exercises? Because just saying the words a calmer nervous system sounds pretty good to most people, I would imagine, even if you don't consider yourself to have any ailments, as it were.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think for people who are interested, great, absolutely. They should buy a Moonbird. They should book sessions with me. They should do whatever it is. But yeah, for people who are having it forced on them. So the reason why there's a lot of energy and charge around this, I've had 3 people recently come up to me and be like, my one guy was saying, my girlfriend keeps trying to push me into therapy. And then another girl was like, I've forced my boyfriend into therapy. Like I made him promise he's going to do therapy, and he says he's getting nothing from it. And then another person, similar, a girl wanting her male friend to do therapy, because they've obviously gotten a lot more therapy, but these guys, they don't have problems, and they resolve their problems in different ways. One guy I was talking to, he's got a great like uncle who's his mentor, and he just speaks to his uncle and he feels fine, and he doesn't feel anxiety or depressed or things like that. But because he experienced something difficult in his childhood, this person thinks, oh, the only solution is therapy. But it's not the only solution. Some people are able to move on from whatever happens. And yeah, Abigail Shrier mentions this study where they had, I think it was done in Plymouth or Portsmouth in the UK, where they had people who had different ranges of trauma. Some people, no trauma whatsoever. Some people, oh, that was probably a traumatic event. Some people had horrific things happen to them. And then they followed up with them like 20 years later, and they like looked at how they were doing in their lives. Did they have mental health issues? Were they in stable relationships, stable jobs? And there was no difference between the different groups. There was no difference between the people who were doing well in life, in the people who are doing well in life, whether or not they had trauma or not. Some people are just able to get through traumatic events. And they found that the key to their success was whether or not they made their trauma a part of their story. If they told themselves, I had this terrible thing, I had this thing happen to me as a child, and that's who I am, those were the people who struggled. Whereas the people who were like, yeah, that thing happened to me, it's not something that I am not a traumatized person. There was a traumatic event, but I've moved on from that. So our story is a big, our self-narrative is a big thing that affects our mental health. So that's my rant over about too
Glad you
much
got that off your
therapy.
chest, Rich.
Yeah, I can relax now. Carry on.
Stephanie, no, that was very useful and informative, of course, as always. I wanted to ask you, Stephanie, I was looking at a website of our favorite online billionaire, and it described Moonbird as a breathing and meditation device. We haven't really touched on meditation. Do you see it as such, or is that just what Amazon Marketplace told me?
That name can be personally, and I think that everybody has their own interpretation of what these terms mean, but I think that breathwork is more appropriate, because the way I interpret these words, meditation for me is the act of becoming more aware and being focused on one reference point, which in most cases is your breath. But it can also be a color that you see or a sound that you hear, but the object is not to change that reference point. And with Moonbird, you are intentionally changing your breathing rate. Now, that being said, what you also do is, while you're using your Moonbird device, is that you are putting your or resting your focus on this external object. So in that sense, it also allows you to focus and rest your attention on this one reference point, which is your breath, but you are as well intentionally slowing down your breath to do those breathing exercises and to reap those benefits of it. So yeah, it's a bit combined, but I would say it shifts more towards the breathwork side of things than to the meditation side of things, which is a bit more pure. And I do know that the purists will say that you do not need any devices to do these things. And I get that, but sometimes we need a little bit of extra help.
I totally agree. Yeah, the purists would say that, but as I said at the start, I think it's really difficult to do some of this breathwork stuff on your own.
Yeah.
So
And
I
wanted
think
to ask you, Richard, because you are an ambassador of Moonbird as well. Like, what are your experiences with it? Did you get any feedback from someone? How are you using it? I'd love to know more about that as well.
Yeah, I really like the biofeedback. I really like the HRV. I think seeing the data in real time is such a useful thing for someone with a mind like me, because I find like with meditation or Reiki or craniosacral, all these really like subtle techniques, I'm not really sure whether or not anything's happening. Sometimes I'm thinking, oh, it's just a placebo. I think I feel something good, but we're not really sure. Whereas the fact that you've got that device just showing you, wow, when I slow my breathing down, my heart rate goes down and my heart rate variability goes up. That's what I found really useful. And yeah, I think the fact that it is tactile, and I really like it's like the silicone. It is like a nice feeling as well. Like it's not plastic, it's not hard, it's not metal. It's this nice, like grippy silicone material on the outside. That makes it really easy to hold, and it's something you want to hold as well.
Yeah.
And the movement of it as well. Because meditation is hard. So many people say, I can't meditate. I just sit there and I'm just thinking about other things and my mind wanders. The fact that it does move, it's almost like you don't need your mind to be so engaged. You don't need your mind to be focusing all the time, because you've got this physical thing, because the body is reacting to the expansion and the contraction of the silicone in your hand. It's many people dissect the human into the mind, body, spirit, nervous system, that kind of thing, and this is just like working with the nervous system without the mind being interfering.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. And there is a neurological way of looking at that. That's when we look at our senses. We have a couple of sensory modalities, like our chemical senses, taste and smell. But then we have the sense of touch, and then we have the auditive and visual sensory modalities. And apart from the chemical ones that were first, the sensory modality is a very old and primitive way of communicating, and it doesn't require so much processing power from our brains compared to the auditive or the visual cues, right? So if we have to listen to an audio guide or if we have to look at an app, it requires a lot of brain capacity from us to just being focused on this and to interpret these signals and then as well to act upon it. Whereas if we use this sense of touch, it's much more intuitive and it's calming in itself. So the way that we guide people to do these exercises by the sense of touch in itself is already calming. And that's also, I think, why a lot of people prefer doing these exercises with the Moonbird versus with an app, because it's so much more intuitive and easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did mention it as well. I like the fact you don't need the app as well, and you can just turn it on and use it without that. It's very handy as well.
That's a design choice that we made that a lot of investors have pulled against us already, because we don't have any recurring revenue or any subscription attached to our product, which is something that investors often go hard on. But I intentionally, and my co-founder as well, we don't like subscriptions that much. And we also think that the value in the app today is perfect for the product and the price for the product, but it's not enough that we could really ask a subscription to it. But it's something that we had arguments on that before. But yeah, no, the app is optional and there's no subscription attached to it.
Wow, that is quite rare in startups.
Good to hear.
To say F you to your investors and do what's best for the consumers. And I think, more people should know and appreciate that hit you've probably had to take from your investors. And I think it's so good, because especially in bed, in the middle of the night, let's say you wake up and you struggle to fall back to sleep, getting on your phone, I have my Wi-Fi off, I'd have to turn off airplane mode, I'd have to turn on the Bluetooth, then I'd have to get the blue light on my screen. That is not going to help you fall back to sleep. Whereas if you can just pick up the device without that, it's so much easier.
Yeah. And it probably helps that I'm a user of the device myself. And so that's one of the things that I really wanted for myself, is just pick it up during the night, do my breathing exercises, put it back to sleep, and then put myself back to sleep as well.
Awesome. And Stephanie, you mentioned one bit of research. You do quite a lot of research. You have a PhD person, don't you, doing research? What other research have you done on Moonbird or Breathwork?
Yeah, so the first study was in sleep. So we evaluated the device in people suffering from insomnia or sleeping problems. And we saw significant improvements when it comes to sleep quality, restfulness during the day, like a number of very important parameters for people suffering from sleeping problems. And the effect was significant, but it was also greater than the placebo effect that you already mentioned, which is quite profound as well. And it's real, right? Placebo is real and it works. But it's nice to see that our significant effects are even bigger than the placebo effect, obviously. And then we just published another study that was published today, where we had therapists evaluating the Moonbird device as an adjuvant to different use cases to cognitive behavioral therapy. That's really some use cases that we described. And then we are doing some research now in the context of stress and anxiety. We actually have 2 research projects going on to evaluate what the impact is in those use cases. And then we always, from the onset when we started the company, are doing user research. So we are exploring with our users how we can optimize the device and how it needs to be changed. And that's not more on the effectiveness side, but really on the user side. And yeah, there are some exciting things that we're exploring and potentially will result in future products that I hope to tell you more about soon.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. The research, it's so great how much research is coming out. Obviously, I am doing my own research, or I've done my own research. I can just remember 4 years ago, I used to work for this charity called Duty to Care, and they were doing sort of alternative therapies for people who worked in the National Health Service in the UK during the pandemic. And I couldn't give away breathwork back then to any of these nurses, doctors, because they were like, "Oh yeah, I've heard about breathwork. Can you tell me more about the scientific research?" And I'll be like, "Nope, there isn't any." And they were like, "Yeah, thanks. I'm going to go speak to a therapist or something like that." But yeah, thank you for doing more research and yeah, helping all the other breath workers out there. And then also, I poo psychotherapy a little bit. I think psychotherapy has this stranglehold on mental health that I don't think is warranted. For example, only 40% of people respond to CBT for anxiety. So the majority of people do not get anything from CBT if they have anxiety. And I guess because of the lineage of talk-based psychotherapy from all the way back to Freud and things like that, the modalities have just been so constrained. And okay, the only way you can heal is by talking. And I think it comes back to the fact that Freud and Jung, they only worked with upper class Austrian women in the early 1900s, the Victorian era. And so yeah, talking may have worked for them, but for guys, I don't know that talking about problems works so much. In the UK, 90% of the men who committed suicide last year were in talk therapy. So clearly talk therapy is not enough for certain populations. And of course, but there'll be plenty of women as well who don't want to just talk about their problems. And maybe I'm being very heteronormative there and I apologize. But nonetheless, my point is we need more tools in psychotherapy. And the fact that you've just demonstrated that a breathwork tool can be an adjunct to psychotherapy, I think is really useful. And I think that's also a good point, is that it's an adjunct. I think a lot of psychotherapists, because they are really the only players in town, and them and psychotherapists, they're the only really legitimate people. They're the only ones with a licensing body. I think they get threatened when you talk about breathwork or ayahuasca or other things. But if you say, hey, no, this is just another tool for you to use for people who aren't responding, that is, I think, is winning.
Yeah, that's a very important point that you mentioned there. You cannot scare them, because otherwise they will not work with you. And you cannot say that this will replace psychotherapists or the psychologists, which is also not what I'm trying to do. For me, it's a tool in a toolbox, and everybody needs to find out what works for them. And we have to just make sure that all these tools become available as much as possible so people can explore and see what works for them. And probably it's not even just one thing, but it's a combination of different things. And you just have to find out for yourself what it is. But please go out and have a taste of all these different solutions, because there is much more than psychotherapy. And yeah, I love that as well. I think that it's very progressive from the psychology practice that they already a couple of years ago said to us, this is the path forward. There are too many people as well for us to see. So we need to think of other ways that we can support these people also at home when we are not there. So I'm very proud of this paper and this publication, and I hope that this will make it easier for us to talk to other psychologists and other practitioners around the globe.
So can users of the Moonbird, can they opt for their data to be used as well on the app, say? Their long-term sort of effects of using the Moonbird, can that be fed back into some of this research?
That's a good question. It is in our privacy policy that we can use the data internally for research purposes. And we have not done like a specific study with that yet. I would love to do that at some point. We're just a bit limited in capacity as well and what we can do. But over time, that makes total sense to really look into subgroups of people. For instance, we can single out those with stress or anxiety, and then it would be super interesting to look at the people that are using the device a lot versus those who aren't, and see if we can find some differences and so on. And then over time, I would love to create profiles of people and then nudge them as well with exercises that we see that work best for their peers, for instance. that is something that's on the roadmap, and that I would love to put or roll out as a feature, but it's not in the app today. But there is just so much to do with that. And we're lucky that we have the sensor incorporated in the device, because that will allow us to do that over time. Yeah.
You say you're limited in capacity. If you're looking for PhD researchers, Guy Fincham, no, Guy Fincham is the guy who has done a lot of breathwork research. No, I would do breathwork research if you wanted me to. I'm applying for a job live on a podcast, listener. There we go. That's how desperate I am. I'm not desperate, but I do research nonetheless. And
I'd
going
love
back
to do that.
Okay, so I didn't put you on the
see.
spot. There you go.
I think you did put her on the spot. Yeah.
I'm not releasing this podcast unless you agree to giving me this job. Thank you very much, Stephanie. We will talk more about this another time. But going back to your point about a shortage of psychotherapists, there is a huge shortage of psychotherapists. And I think the main reason for that is there's loads of people in therapy who don't need to be in therapy. That's a joke. There are a lot of people, most people who are in therapy need to be in therapy. The real reason is that, there's a shortage of 9,000 therapists in the US, and that number is only going to go up. And one of the reasons for that is because psychotherapy training is really hard. I did 2 years of it. My wife is in her second year of it. It's really grueling. It's academically fairly rigorous. It is a master's level thing, and a lot of people drop out. From my master's course, in my cohort, I think we started with 21 and only 10 people went on to the second year. I don't know how many people graduated, because I didn't go on to the second year. I went on to do my PhD in something different. But the reason it's so difficult is because you have to have so much therapy on yourself. It is pretty brutal. You're doing live therapy sessions with people watching, and I've seen a lot of people leave those sessions in tears, as in the therapists leaving in tears. So to be basic, I know I've not said nice things about psychotherapists, but they are really well trained, so much better trained than your average life coach and things like that. So that's why this is me giving the other side of the coin. Psychotherapists are incredibly well trained, and that's part of the problem. Is there's a bit of a bottleneck with training more psychotherapists, because we need them to be of a high standard. So in the meantime, tools like the Moonbird can really fill that gap as well.
100% agree.
Absolutely. Okay.
I was going to ask, what's next for Moonbird? You mentioned a little bit earlier about potential new products. Can you give us a little bit of an insight about what's next for you?
Yeah, so we launched a product in our home market, and we're quite proud of what we've accomplished already. We sold almost 40,000 devices in a fairly small market, I'd say. And we've proven product market fit here. We have low return rates, we have a high NPS and so on. So people are happy with the device. And we're creating a real impact, which is so cool. Because I 5 years ago invented this while I was lying awake in my bed, and now it's here and it's doing all these things. So that's so amazing. So the next step, and we thought about that a lot in recent months, is we want to spread our wings, and we want to get Moonbird to take flight internationally as well. So that's why we're now entering the United States, but it's such a big market. So it's a whole new challenge for us. How do we replicate this initial success in new markets where it's not our home market and we don't know the people and we don't have any network yet and so on? So that's a very important question for us to solve. And then we want to launch new products, because we want to enable people to use their breath as a tool, and we want to develop innovative tech that helps people to do this. And the Moonbird product is the first device, but we have much more age categories, much more use cases, much more ideas in how we can do that. And so ultimately, we want to develop a portfolio of products that guide people to use their breath as a tool. So venturing into new markets and exploring opportunities to develop new products, I'd say.
Awesome.
Amazing. Yeah.
All right. Where do we find you? Where do our listeners find you and Moonbird?
You can go to our Instagram page, moonbird.life, or our website, which is also moonbird.life. And those are the two most important places to find us and to follow us.
Awesome. And Andy, where do they find us?
Oh, good question. All good and bad podcast websites, richardlblake.com, at The Breath Geek, at Andy Esam on Instagram. That
awesome.
Is. I also found out I've got Twitter, but don't add me on there. It's a bit of a cesspit.
I have that as well. It's not called Twitter anymore either, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't know.
That's how far behind I am.
God.
Yeah.
How do you tweet now? What do? Do you X? Oh, I X.
UX, yeah.
You X a comment?
I think so.
Oh, God.
I noticed that all newspapers in Belgium said you can read the comment on X and then between brackets always add Twitter, because
Twitter,
nobody
yeah.
knows.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like both of it combined now.
Okay, don't add us on X or Twitter.
Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on. You said earlier you have made an impact, and I would totally echo that. It's awesome what you're doing. Love how accessible it is, and yeah, best of luck for all that comes next.
Yeah,
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
for the
Stephanie.
invitation as well.
Yeah, it was great to have you. Thank you. All right, thank you, listener. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.